Today we're continuing our series through the Psalms of Ascent. And to be honest, I really wasn't sure I was going to continue this series after we had our miscarriage. Particularly this psalm was one I questioned, God, do you want me to do this one? Because I don't know I can genuinely say it. And the more I did it, the more I wrestled with it back and forth, and I really think that I can. It's going to be kind of nuanced today. If you notice, the title is God the Rescuer. Because I truly do believe He is our rescuer. But at the same time, at some point in the last 2 weeks, I Googled, what do you do when it feels like God is against you? And honestly, I don't know that I got a satisfactory answer to that. I'm still wrestling with those feelings as I preach to you today the truth that God is for you, that He is by your side. And the reality is that sometimes I know things are true, but I can't feel them in the moment. And so this psalm today presents the truth that God is your help when bad things come. Now again, it's going to be presented with some nuance here as we recognize that sometimes God's help doesn't look like what we think it should. Sometimes I don't see how He has stepped in and helped in situations. Well, let's read our psalm, and then we'll kind of break it down and look at it. Psalm 124, a song of ascents of David. If the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive when their anger flared against us. The flood would have engulfed us. The torrent would have swept over us. The raging waters would have swept us away. Praise be to the Lord, who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the Maker of heaven and earth. The psalm presents us with a couple of realities. The first reality is that bad things are going to come. Bad things are going to come upon us, whether we are a believer, whether we're not a believer. This world is full of brokenness, and there's an evil one out there seeking to get us. He starts off with this idea of attacks from the wicked. As after he's introduced this first part of the Lord is on our side, then he says, when people attacked us, and he says they would have swallowed us alive when their anger flared against us. We see direct attacks. This idea of swallowed alive, it's not to be taken literally. There wasn't a monster out there that was going to swallow him. But I think we can understand what it means. It's a swift and intentional attack. You don't swallow something alive unintentionally. You don't do it slowly. It's swift and intentional. And yet, he says in verse 2, he says that when people attacked us, or when men attacked us. Now, while he does mention particularly people attacking him, these kind of intentional, swift attacks are all directed, even when directed by humans, they're all directed at the hands of Satan. And these are times when we can tell that Satan is trying to stop us. We can say this is definitely a work of Satan trying to stop us from doing what we need to do. Stop us from being who we need to be. Stop us from knowing God and helping others to do the same. And there are times whenever it's clear that that's what's going on. Peter tells his readers in 1 Peter chapter 5 that Satan prowls around like a lion to devour. And in the midst of this passage, he's telling them to humble themselves before others and before God. He wants them to recognize that they have less control over things the things around them than they thought they had. And so in order to move forward, we have to entrust God, entrust our futures to God, recognizing that He is the one that cares for us. Yet He also says in this, Satan prowls around, so therefore be alert. Be alert in the moment, knowing that Satan is always working. And this is the pressure that the psalmist felt. A direct attack that was swift and strong. He felt an under attack. Have you ever felt that kind of pressure before? There was a moment in your life where you go, you know what? I know I'm under attack. Maybe it was by other human beings. Maybe it wasn't. But you know it's Satan's work. But then as the psalm continues on, I think he describes something that's not so much a direct attack. Look at verses 4 and 5. The flood would have engulfed us. The torrent would have swept over us. The raging waters would have swept us away. Now he begins to describe chaos and fear and destruction and these things that we can't directly attribute to one particular person or even necessarily a direct work of Satan. I cannot explain why all bad things that happen occur to us. Some things we find are just unfair and bad. And this is the picture we get when the psalmist starts talking about waters and floods that overwhelm. We can, to some extent, understand what he's saying here because we know the destructive nature of floods. We know the destructive nature of raging rivers and how they can tear pieces of land out. How floods can wipe houses away. Yet I think there's still something deeper here. In ancient cultures, the waters were a sign of chaos. The ocean and its unsearchable depth was something that they greatly feared. Something that seemed out of control, chaotic. And so to hear this description as a flood that engulfs us, a torrent that has swept us away, raging waters, begin to see this weight and this fear. Our church has been through some difficult times this year. I talked about that yesterday. Personally, I've been through some difficult times. Many of you personally have been through a lot of things. Yet we're here. I think we felt the weight of this, whether it's a direct attack or it's an attack, it's something that we cannot fully understand as to why it's happened or when it's happened. But we can relate to the psalmist here and saying, I don't understand why it's happened, but I know it has. And I know that I'm still here. I'm able to stand here and tell you by the grace of God that I don't know what the future holds. But I know that God has remained faithful. And He's given me the strength to take this one step at a time. There have been times where I've doubted God. There have been times where I've been angry at God. Times where I wanted to give up. And there will be more, I'm sure. And I don't really understand what He's up to. Or what good could possibly come of some of the bad things that I've faced? Maybe you think the same things. But this psalm reminds us that He will bring us through it in His time and in His way. Now bear with me as we continue to look at how He does this. How does He work to bring escape? I think the first thing we have to recognize is that oftentimes we get to a point before God steps in where we feel completely helpless. I don't know that it's always the case, but oftentimes we feel the same way the psalmist does. As we continue reading, after he talks about the waters, he then says, "Praise be to the Lord." He begins introducing God's rescue, but before he gets there, he talks about his helplessness. He says, "Praise be to the Lord, who has not let us be torn by their teeth." This picture of prey within the predator's teeth. Not just surrounded, but in the mouth, about to be consumed. Picture this. What a helpless state. There's nothing left for the prey to do. No chance of running, no chance of fighting. Utterly helpless. Unless someone else steps in. It's often where we find ourselves, in a state of helplessness. Nothing we can do to fix it. Nothing we can do to get out of it. And the psalmist is saying, I've been there. I've felt that. The metaphor goes on. Not only are we within the teeth of the predator, but he says we're like a bird caught in a trap. Not only helpless, but scared and vulnerable. Bound to a cage with no way of escape. You ever felt that way? Stuck, helpless, weak? You're not alone. The psalmist felt it too. And it's here in these moments that God often meets us. That He personally steps in. When Paul is wrestling with this thorn in the flesh in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, this ailment, this ache, this problem that won't go away, this thing that tormented him, God reminds him, as he's asking God over and over to take it away, He reminds him, saying that God's power shines the brightest in the moments where we're weak. And Paul responds by saying that I will boast in my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. So in the moments where we're weak and helpless, God's power shines brightly. So we begin to see this picture of bad things will come. And oftentimes we get to the point of feeling this helplessness, yet God is our help. God is our help. Now, I don't know much about the events that unfolded that caused David or whoever wrote this psalm to write this in the way they did. I'm kind of glad that it's left vague. We don't know who or what caused this sense of distress, that feeling like you're backed against the wall, that feeling like you're stuck and you can't get out, like you have nowhere else to turn. We don't know what caused that. And sometimes I think that's good because that allows us then to apply it to many different situations. I think of some biblical examples of this. We think of the Israelites as they're leaving Egypt. They've been in prison for hundreds of years, and now they're free. And they're leaving, and they're getting away from all of that. And then where do they find themselves? Trapped like a bird in a cage. They find themselves in between the Red Sea with the Egyptian army coming up to them. A place where they had no place to turn. But then God rescued him in His way. He went ahead. He was ahead of them. He moved from ahead of them to behind them to protect them. and he opened a way through the waters, and they went through. We can see how that applies this psalm here. And then the New Testament example, think of the disciples when they're on the boat and the storm comes up and it's about to swamp the boat, and though they had seasoned fishermen among them, there was nothing they could do. They were scared and helpless, like an animal in the mouth of its predator. Nothing they could do. And then Jesus calmed the storm in his way and in his time. And these are examples I can look to, great examples of faith and times where it worked out. And then I think about John the Baptist. John the Baptist, as he sat in prison, awaiting a death sentence, he sends his followers to ask Jesus, could you possibly be the one? Almost implying, if you really are, could you do something about this? Why don't you step in? Could John sing this song of rescue? Could he rejoice in the one who's his rescuer as the executioner was coming? This is a difficult reality. We know that God can rescue, and we know that God did rescue John in the greatest way possible, that he was taken from the broken world into a full and complete life with God, yet it still leaves us with a bit of a pit in our stomach thinking, he could have rescued him a bit sooner. And so I wrestle with some of this a bit. And then, as I'm wrestling with this, our men's Bible study group has been going through a series in preparation for the Advent season, where we're reading passages throughout the whole narrative of the Bible. And they point us to the reality that Jesus came down to earth for us. And the one thing that struck me throughout this whole series has been how God has worked in the big picture. How he works to accomplish his plan through the chaos and the brokenness of this world. And while it's hard oftentimes for each of us to see past the chaos and the brokenness of the moment, it is a reminder that there's more beyond this. I don't know that I can put all the pieces together and I can explain exactly how it works. But I know that I serve the same God who worked throughout the history of all the Bible, with its loss and with its brokenness, and with its depravity and sin and hurt. And that he can do the same for me, and he can do the same for you. That he is the God who rescues. This psalm presents the idea that we have escaped. And again, it's something that's true but difficult to preach because there's not always that visible escape. But the word in verse 7, look at verse 7 with me again. It says, we have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. If you have a different version, it doesn't say we, it says my soul. My soul has escaped. And I talked about this in the previous psalm, that this is a deep word that means more than just my physical presence here, but the deepest part of who I am. The rescue that comes to my soul beyond this. Sometimes it's evident that we have a physical escape, like the Israelites or the disciples at the on the sea. But not always. Sometimes, like John the Baptist, that physical escape doesn't come. Sometimes our soul is rescued from the effects of this world as we recognize that Jesus paid the ultimate cost. as we recognize that He is the one that saves our soul in a deeper way than anything we could ever face on this earth. When the psalm says that He has rescued us, it's not a promise that He will remove you from all problems, but it reveals the character of God. Remember the series title that I've chosen for this. It's The Heart of God. And it reveals something about God, that He is the one that helps us through all seasons. That He is the one that shines forth even whenever we can't see it. I do believe that if we were able to zoom out and look at the whole picture of our life, we would see God's goodness there. Just as when we look at Scripture, the individual stories of the Bible, there's much heartache and pain and loss and unfairness. Yet the whole story of the Bible is a beautiful one of God's revelation of Himself and His salvation plan. That He's the one who sticks with us, and He's the one that helps us through these chaotic waters. And so in that, we're able to proclaim what it says in the psalm. Maybe not always feeling it, maybe not always seeing it, but knowing it, that our help is in the name of the Lord, the Maker of heaven and earth. The Israelites that were saved from the Egyptian army, went through the waters, didn't go on to not have any more problems. They didn't have a rosy trip to the promised land. There were plenty of other times where they repeated the same thing to Moses that they said in that moment, which was, "Why did you bring us out here just to die?" There were times where they caused problems with their own sin. There were times when they faced the difficulty just of being in the desert. And then even when they got to the promised land, it wasn't easy. Yet they were able to proclaim, "Our help is in the name of the Lord." The disciples, after Jesus saved them on the boat, faced more problems. As a matter of fact, history tells us that each one of them suffered some kind of death for the Lord. Yet they could proclaim with the psalmist, "Our help is in the name of the Lord." Whether it's the salvation of our souls beyond what we can see, or it's a physical rescue, the character of God is that He is the God who rescues. And I'm going to keep reminding myself of that even whenever I cannot see it. And this is the reality of the psalm that this is the psalm that we've read today. I'm going to finish out by just reading through the psalm one more time and letting the words of Scripture resonate within each person. After that, we're going to sing our song of invitation. And you respond however you feel like God is calling you to respond. If you need prayer, if you need encouragement, if you need to make a decision to follow the Lord for the first time and trust Him, I encourage you to do that. If you just say, "You know what, I can't see it, I don't believe it, I don't know it for certain, but I want to," well, let's just sit there together. Let's go through that. Let's seek after God together. Psalm 124. If the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side. When people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive. When their anger flared against us, the flood would have engulfed us. The torrent would have swept over us. The raging waters would have swept us away. And praise be to the Lord, who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We've escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare, the snare that has been broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the Maker of heaven and earth.